Okay, listen up. I'm Alex, and this is First 5, where I ask if games are worth your time, not your money. I played a game for 5 hours, and I'm going to tell you if those were 5 hours well spent. Today, we're hunting the mighty sky whale in Airheart, Tales of Broken Wings. You're from a desert wasteland, you now live in a floating sky city, and you're on a quest to hunt Moby Dick. Airheart's plot pretty much ends there and becomes pure gameplay after that quick introduction, so let's move on to. This game features two main phases. First, you have your forays into the sky, which primarily feature twin-stick shooter gameplay, where you'll gather money from collecting skyfish and raw materials from blowing up sky pirates. Then you'll take all that back home and use the money to buy parts for your airplane and the materials to build new weapons. Outside of the usual fun of twin-stick shooters, which, yes, Airheart successfully captures, the real standout is the harpoon gun, which you slowly discover is a veritable Swiss Army knife of a mechanic. Its primary function is to latch onto larger enemy ships and tear them apart piece by piece, stripping them of weapons and armor. That's cool enough on its own, but you can also harpoon smaller enemies and they'll become sitting ducks that won't fight back as you shoot them down. Or you can decide to make that plane a bludgeon, or just launch it into a big rock. Similarly, you can harpoon environmental hazards and swing them around at your enemies. Or just harpoon a rock and use it to swing yourself around an island. This is a really fun mechanic to play with that makes Airheart stand out from other twin-stick shooters. Airheart's other interesting invention is the way it treats verticality. Every stage physically exists in layers, one on top of the other. So every time you go out, you have to make your way through existing stages on your way to higher altitudes. It could have easily been frustrating to wade through old, easier levels with lesser rewards, but luckily, it only takes a few seconds to find the exit and move to the next layer if you just want to get back to where you were before. But when you decide to go back home, or worse, end up coming in on a crash landing, you have to go through all those layers again, dodging floating islands on your way back. And obviously, the higher you go, the longer the return trip. The game's aesthetic is similarly great. Skyfishing might sound like a weird main activity, but it's aesthetically unique. And once you realize you can harpoon fast-moving fish instead of futilely chasing them in circles, it becomes a fun activity. Add in an enjoyable soundtrack and some beautiful art in the floating islands, and the game feels unique, and even a little breathtaking. Airheart's critical failing, however, is its opaqueness. For example, many plane parts come with attached abilities, but Airheart never actually tells you what they do, and leaves you to try and figure it out through trial and error in the field. Some abilities like Boost are pretty self-explanatory, but I still couldn't tell you for the life of me what the hell Overdrive does. The crafting system is particularly reticent to divulge its secrets. The two ways you upgrade your arsenal are through buying parts at the store and making those same parts yourself in the workshop. I like the base loop of the crafting system, where you start with raw materials, make some basic building blocks, which are then combined into more sophisticated instruments, which in turn finally make a useful end product you can slap on your ship. But the way the game drip feeds you information can make the system feel a little bit directionless. The only direction the game gives you is to recommend a list of 7 blueprints you can make with the materials you have on hand. But it doesn't tell you what that blueprint is, or what specific parts you need to make it beyond the general category and numbers of parts. And even if you've made a part before, even if you already have it in your inventory, its blueprint can still pop up in this list, and you just have to remember the object's silhouette to avoid making it again. This also means that if you don't have the parts to make it, you'll never know a particular crafting item exists. And when a wing or weapon themselves requires 4 different parts to be crafted, which in turn also require you to have different parts to make them, you more often than not stumble into accidentally gathering the parts required for something actually useful. The most egregious system Airheart neglected to mention, however, I discovered 3 hours in when I was one shot out of the sky by a farting fish, and abruptly found out that, oh, by the way, this game has permadeath. If you happen to miss your home island when crash landing, it's an outright game over, and you have to restart from the beginning. Permadeath obviously isn't automatically a bad thing, but I question what it adds to the game in this specific instance. Restarting a new run takes you through identical maps, down an identical linear tech tree, fighting the same bosses and grinding the same materials to make the same equipment. There's nothing randomized or different about subsequent playthroughs, and there isn't enough variance in your equipment choices to let you approach the same challenges with a new build, which begs the question of what was the point of being forced to restart other than to artificially pad the game's runtime. You could maybe argue that it introduces a risk-reward system as to how low you want to risk your health getting before you head back, which would be interesting, but that dynamic already exists in normal non-game ending crash landings. If you crash land and survive, you already lose most of the cargo you had with you, which, when you've spent a half hour building up a couple $1,000 of fish to bring home, is already a hefty risk on its own. And even worse, you can damage your plane and have to grind to rebuild lost parts, a softer version of the full permadeath restart. There's simply no reason for permadeath to exist, and all it does is waste my time. Now that I've gotten that out of my system, let's get to the verdict. Despite being a relatively short game, Airheart won't remotely respect your time. You're going to be spending a lot of time going in circles, figuring things out with the crafting system, and wasting even more getting back to where you were after a crash or death. But to its credit, Airheart's moment-to-moment gameplay still makes it a pretty fun twin-stick shooter, so if you're willing to grit your teeth and persevere through all that, you'll still find a pretty enjoyable game. Because honestly, at the end of the day, I did still enjoy Airheart. And while I can't recommend it for anyone whose time is at a premium, if you like what you see and my complaints haven't turned you off, I say go for it. Airheart might be all too ready to waste your time, but at the very least, that time spent is still fun, and that's worth something. Hey, do you believe that your time is the most valuable thing you have? Do you want to find more games that respect that time? This channel is all about finding games that don't pad themselves and can be completed in a reasonable amount of time. So if that sounds appealing to you, then consider hitting that subscribe button. But regardless, thanks for watching this far, and I'll see you all next week.